Hello, my name is Alex Thornton and I'm an Associate Professor of Cognitive Evolution here at the University of Exeter. What that means is that I'm interested in how animals' minds work and why they work in that way. How have animals' cognitive abilities evolved? Now, by cognition, we mean the set of mental processes, including learning and memory, through which animals acquire information from their environments, process and store that information, and use it to make decisions. So why might the range of cognitive processes used, what we might think of broadly as intelligence, differ between different species? Well, for thousands of years, since the time of the ancient Greeks, Western philosophy has been dominated by the idea that the world can be organized as a scala natura, a great chain of being or a ladder of life, starting with rocks and minerals, going up to plants, lowly animals, then up to us humans, and with the divine beyond. And as a hangover from this idea, people often assume that we can rank animals' cognitive abilities in a similar way, so that animals that are most similar to us, like chimpanzees and gorillas, come at the top of the ladder, whereas lowlier, less evolved animals, like cockroaches or worms, occupy the lower rungs of the ladder and are merely simple machine-like automata. Well, this way of thinking still influences the way that people treat animals, but it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how evolution works. Because evolution is not a ladder leading neatly up as a progression towards human-like forms. Instead, as Darwin taught us, evolution instead creates a tree of life, a branching tree. And we can think of human beings as one tip of one tiny little twig of a tiny little branch of this tree. And we are no more and no less evolved than any other creature on any other tip of a tiny little twig of a tiny little branch of the tree. And this is illustrated really beautifully if we look at a modern phylogenetic tree. So this is a tree of life created by looking at the genetic similarities between different organisms. And what you can see is that we need to zoom in to find ourselves here as one tiny branch among the primates, among the mammals. And this really makes us throw away this old-fashioned notion that there's any sense of progression towards humans. There isn't progress towards humans, but rather we are no more and no less evolved than any other creature on this planet. And why is this relevant to understanding cognitive evolution? Well, first of all, it highlights to us the fact that we're all related. So not just you and I and every other human, but also us and chimps and octopus and worms and donkeys and amoeba. We're all related. And what that implies is that there's likely to be some commonalities in the ways that we all process information. But perhaps more fundamentally, it means that rather than just assuming that those creatures that are most similar to us are the most intelligent, we actually need to start thinking about how each animal's cognitive abilities have evolved to solve the particular problems that they face in their environments. Think, for example, of an Arctic fox, beautifully camouflaged against the Arctic snows. Now, this is an excellent example of a biological adaptation whereby individuals that had this trait of white fur were more likely to survive and reproduce and pass on their genes to their offspring compared to individuals that didn't have the trait. And in the same way, we can also start to think about cognitive adaptations, aspects of animals' minds that have evolved to process information to cope with the specific challenges that they face in their daily lives. Now, broadly speaking, these challenges might be social or ecological. One critical ecological challenge for every animal is finding enough food to eat. And for animals that live in temperate climates, this can be particularly challenging during the cold winter months. Some animals have solved this problem by caching or hiding food for the winter. You may well have seen, for example, a coal tit or a jay in your garden going around hiding seeds or acorns during the autumn months for use later on in the winter. Now, this is a very sensible strategy to tide you over for the period when food is harder to come by, but it creates a fundamental cognitive challenge, because if you're going to hide food, you need to remember where it was. So this creates some really remarkable cognitive adaptations. If we look, for example, at the brains of different closely related birds, we'll see that birds like this little coal tit shown here on my right, the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain that's particularly associated with storing and processing spatial information, the hippocampus of these birds is larger than it is in closely related birds like great tits that don't rely so much on storing food for the winter. And this larger hippocampus also seems to be associated with remarkable abilities of spatial memory. So one example of this is the Clark's nutcracker, a bird of the crow family that lives in the forests of North America. Now, this bird can hide up to 30,000 seeds across the forest during the autumn, and then go and retrieve more than 90% of them several months later when the forest is covered in a thick blanket of snow. Now, if, like me, you forget where you put your keys on a daily basis, this ability to remember locations is really remarkable and rather humbling. So we've seen that food storing gives us a really nice example of an ecological challenge that can generate cognitive adaptations. But for many animals, the biggest challenges that they face are actually social. And if you reflect on your own life, this may well ring true. For many of us, the most mentally taxing problems that we face are dealing with other people, figuring out how to cooperate with others, who to learn from, managing relationships, avoiding being duped. And in fact, the most influential explanation for the evolution of humans' large brains and intelligence is that they've evolved as adaptations to cope with the challenges of social life. And there's evidence that this is also true in other animals. So among birds and mammals, for example, those species that live in large social groups or that maintain long-term social relationships tend to have bigger brains. There's even some evidence that adaptations, cognitive adaptations for social life occur in insects. Now, next time you go out for a picnic and there's a wasp harassing you for your slice of cake, take a look at its face. You'll notice that each individual has very distinct black and yellow markings on its face. And each individual's face is different, just like your face is different from mine. In a recent study conducted in the USA, researchers compared two different species of paper wasps. One species lives in social groups with a dominance hierarchy, and the other species is relatively solitary. The researchers tested these wasps on their ability to learn and remember different faces. And remarkably, the more social species was really good at this. They were very quick to learn to recognize different faces, whereas the more solitary species wasn't able to do this. So what this suggests is that the challenges of living in these structured social groups have led to facial recognition as a cognitive adaptation in this more social species of paper wasp. And this is a cognitive adaptation that they share with us because, of course, humans are also very good at recognizing different faces. And this illustrates a more general point, which is that we just can't rank animals' intelligence on the basis of how similar they are to us. But instead, we need to recognize that animals have evolved to solve the problems that they face. They've evolved to be as smart as they need to be to cope with the particular challenges they encounter in their daily lives. And in some cases, like our food-storing birds that, unlike me, can remember where they put things, they might be smarter than us. So this short lecture just gives you a little taster of the sorts of things that you might learn about if you come and study with us here at the University of Exeter, where we have probably the world's largest group of leading researchers working on behavior and cognition in animals and humans anywhere in the world. I hope you'll join us.